The Independent Women's Forum, Hadley Heath Manning. We've also got Real Clear Politics national political reporter Caitlin Huey Burns, and last but certainly not least, New York City Council Minority Whip Joe Morelli. So, Joe, begin with you. You talked to Trump and his surrogates a good deal. They've got to be a little chagrined by that because the tax cut has gotten very popular, even popular with independents, and yet it's independents who've seen the support swing from a Republican Congress to now favoring a Democratic one. What's going on?
Well, I don't think it's exactly an entirely rosy picture for Democrats. There was another poll out this month that when you take state-by-state polling, you saw 5 Democratic senators actually would lose on the ballot had it been held that day. I think you are seeing
So at the very least, you see the Senate staying the way it is.
Well, right. You know, in the generic ballot, the president in the midterms always seems to lose a little bit. And I think one of the things that we saw in Conor Lamb's PA 18 race was that President Trump didn't really help or hurt it. He wasn't on the ticket. If you remember back to 2012, Barack Obama, there was a cult of personality. Even though he was not necessarily a popular president in the midterm, having him on top of the ticket motivated the people. I think when President Trump is more involved or even perhaps on the ballot again in 2 years, you're going to see Republicans returning home and being very, very, very forceful in the elections.
You know, Caitlin, a lot of people have said, do we utilize the president on the stump to help us or not? What do you think after the Lamb situation?
It completely depends on where you are. You mentioned the Senate map is very different from the House map. If you're a Republican senator, we're seeing those senators running towards Donald Trump, hoping that he'll motivate the base in those states because you have lots of Democrats up for re-election in states that Trump won. On the House side, it's very different. The path for Democrats to take over the House runs through New Jersey, New York, California, places in Colorado and elsewhere.
Where I think take the House?
I think, you know, it looks promising at this point. I'm still very skeptical because we are talking in March and the elections are in November. One thing I will say, though, is that we've seen in the Pennsylvania race and in some other races that Republicans are turning out. They're meeting their target numbers. It's just that Democrats are vastly overperforming. And also you mentioned the independents in that poll and women also in that poll supporting more of a Democratic controlled Congress than a Republican one. That's what Republicans are worried about, that they're hemorrhaging support among independents, not necessarily among their own base.
You know, Hadley, another interesting phenomenon that's happening here is this rejection of some of the once Democratic Party stalwarts. Hillary Clinton getting ripped apart by fellow Democrats on her notion that a lot of Republican women or women in general who voted for Donald Trump did so at the behest of their boyfriends and husbands. Generally not an avant-garde remark. But you also have growing concern that Nancy Pelosi, in words of drag for the party, her approval numbers have gone down into the high teens, low 20s, record low numbers there. So it's not an across-the-board all Democrats all the time. There are some Democrats they don't want to deal with any of the time, huh?
That's right. And I think it would do both parties well to get some fresh blood, to get some new leadership, to get some new faces, new names on the ballot. But when it comes to midterms, 2 points. Caitlin and Joe have already touched on this, but we don't elect a Congress nationally. We do it district by district or state by state in the case of the Senate. So looking at polls in the states that Republicans want to do well, the tax law continues to be very popular. That should be their focus. They should tout the economy, the economic benefits of that reform. And secondly, elections go to the people who show up. So turnout's going to be the most important variable. And of course, new presidents tend to lose in the midterm election following their election. But people, it's hard to be negative. It's hard to get those negative emotions motivating people to go to the polls when the economy is doing well. So it's going to be a good economy versus an anti-Trump sentiment.
All right. So, Joe, if we were to play this out and look toward November, and it's always hard to do, but this idea that now the president is targeting Bob Mueller in his comments and tweets, that he's gone from not naming him to very much naming him, has fueled a lot of fire among even Republicans who say go slow. Is he risking compounding this political problem in the midterms by doing that?
I actually don't think so. And this is something that Caitlin and I were just discussing backstage. You know, you saw the president's poll numbers go up in February as the tax cuts went into effect. You saw the president's poll numbers go down after Parkland as people were frustrated with the government's handling of it. You saw them go back after North Korea. What that tells me is that people are just they're stopping to pay attention to the scandal du jour of the Trump administration, which the other networks, you know, carry wall to wall. They promote it in such hysterical narratives that people have just phased out. doubt. I think,
But doesn't he feed that base? Shouldn't he just ignore it?
Well, he certainly doesn't put out the flames.
Right.
But I think his base isn't going anywhere on the issue. I think his base is rightfully concerned that this Bob Mueller investigation is getting out of control. There was an article on CNN.com that linked Stormy Daniels to the Russia investigation. This is, the validation of the moving goalpost theory by some other networks.
All right. Now, I don't know what's more amazing, the Stormy Daniels charge or the fact that you are, in fact, reading CNN.com. But I'll let that go. Caitlin, the question then going forward is how the president moves forward on this. He's very strong on this opioid thing, getting a control over it, maybe showing that as commander-in-chief, he can lead on that issue. He can lead on tax cuts. But I always think some of these tweet attacks will always destroy whatever progress he's made. Just my opinion. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill would agree with you, especially since they are going to be on the ballot. They want the president to be talking about tax reform every day, about the economy every day, going out and doing events like this in New Hampshire. Instead, the president is
why aren't we seeing the tax cut thing reverberating? Is it people are looking at it and getting a sense of what Democrats are saying? Hey, this is chump change. You really aren't benefiting.
I think it's more a reflection of how people are feeling about the president's behavior in office and the things that he's doing
but
and saying.
That's been a constant, right?
That's been a constant. But we have seen polls that show that people do feel like the economy is good, but they're not giving the president credit for it, and that will trickle down to the party. I mean, the Democratic Party at this point is, the base is very motivated by this anti-Trump sentiment. That's, helpful for them in a midterm. It's not necessarily for presidential election. If Trump were to let the investigation play out, the Mueller probe, the White House has validated parts of it by issuing sanctions against Russians for the indictments of parts of it. And also, if he would just let it play out.
In other words, if they were in cozy with the Russians, they wouldn't have done that.
If they would just let it play out, then he could focus on these other things. But he talks about this a lot. Also, when he's campaigning, he talks about a lot of these cultural and social issues as well. That are designed to gin up the base, but also have the reverse effect of generating generating opposition among Democrats.
Real quick, Hadley, this is one of the states that the president lost to Hillary Clinton, albeit by just a small amount, although it was his opening victory there that set the stage for his winning the Republican nomination. But he also visited California last week. He is going into the waters and going into states that he lost, but I'm wondering if this is a sign of things to come, that he is not just writing off states that he might have not done too well in the last go-round, that he's setting up the markers here, that he will include those in his battle plan. What do you think?
Well, the benefits of President Trump's economic agenda are coast to coast. They are for every state. They're for people of both political parties. And I think getting that messaging across, really trying to position himself as a uniter, it's very difficult for the president to do because, as you mentioned, Neil, he can go off on Twitter sometimes. His communication style, very different from the communication style of Republicans in Congress, and sometimes for the better. If Democrats had passed a tax law that put money back in people's pockets, they wouldn't be talking about trillions of dollars and a faceless economy. They would be talking about the new shoes, the warm coats that families are going to be able to buy, a new fridge, a vacation. They would be talking about how this makes a very personal difference in the lives of Americans. We feel it, but Republicans need to do a better job of messaging on why this is not just a political issue, but it's a personal one as well.
Well, they're very bad at that. They are bad at marketing, and that's important. All right, guys, thank you all very, very much.